When we've gotten used to spitting into a tube to try to create music at a high level, a certain amount of unnatural habits may have crept in. We never want to get to the bottom of our air capacity and have to squeeze out the last remaining bit, because that creates tension. So now we're going to start a deep dive on breathing and using our air and embouchure. So to get into that, we're going to start with what I call a balanced air and a balanced structure approach. A lot of teachers will say use more air, but I believe in balanced air, which we'll talk about more in a moment. So what do I mean when I say balanced structure? I'm talking about your embouchure, but rather than thinking of an embouchure as something we need to actively use and manipulate, think of it simply as a structure that an appropriate column of air passes through for a particular note. That structure can be adjusted for range or volume or even tone, but it's always in a balanced approach. So let's go in depth about balanced air now. We're going to talk a lot today about technique. And technique is kind of hard to feel in our bodies sometimes because it's so different from what we do naturally. But just like any high-level sport, we do need to analyze our technique and be aware of what is happening in our bodies so we can fix the many different fundamental issues, including embouchure, aperture, corners, mechanisms of support, and all the muscles at work. Just keep in mind, we always need to come back to using our air correctly. I do think the more simply and naturally we use our air, the better. Even though breathing is one of the most natural things we do on a daily basis, it's still beneficial to be able to understand and even analyze the mechanics of some of these fundamental issues. The way we understand the concept and figure out what to do and maybe what not to do. So, all technique and tools we use come back to using our air freely, and air is a replenishable resource, as opposed to muscle, which tires out and can be fickle depending on any number of factors. For efficiency and consistency, you have to prioritize balanced air over muscle. But aside from technical benefits, proper air usage allows for expression and freedom and musicality as well. So let the air be your control group in a scientific experiment. If the air is always balanced and appropriate for the note you're playing, you get to experiment with how much muscle or strength is needed, which means you get to see just how little effort you need to make it work. Efficiency reliant on a replenishable resource. So if your air isn't consistent, then your scientific method doesn't work. There are too many variables, and that equals inconsistencies from day to day. Missed notes, inefficient playing overall, relying too heavily on that quickly diminishing resource of muscle. So again, please constantly remind yourself that you need to use a balanced, natural approach to air all the time. Otherwise, even the most textbook perfect embouchure and technique will not work, at least not for long. So let's do some expansive breathing. We need to breathe low to high. Your belly is going to expand first. You might think of that as diaphragmatic breathing. And as you fill your lungs, your intercostals will expand from low to high. So, put a hand on your back and on your lower rib cage and feel them expand as you breathe into your belly. Feel all that expansion, always from the bottom. Then as your lungs expand, your shoulders should also expand with your chest. Even think of filling your open throat. Feel the length of your neck, all without developing tension. Remember, the expansion has to start low in your belly. So a quick demonstration of that low to high breath. Everything expanding. Even if you're sticking out your gut when you breathe, because maybe you've been told it should expand. If you're actually only filling up your chest as you breathe, you're breathing too high and probably aren't accessing at least a third of your air capacity. I have an old teacher of mine, Jim Thatcher, studio legend in LA, played on every single movie soundtrack you've heard. He used to tell me to suck up the rug. Literally imagine the air filling from a low breath, sucking up the rug. So again, the most important thing is to make sure that you expand low first. So I'm going to do a quick demo on a breathing bag. I use a few different breathing apparatuses. The breathing bag is the one I probably use most often just because it gets me to feel like I'm breathing very naturally rather than it being a workout. This is a 5-liter bag. If you're generally a larger person and you might have larger lung capacity, so you might need a 6-liter bag. I want to just demonstrate one time what happens if I inhale only in the high in the chest. I'm going to keep my abdomen firm here just to show you what happens if I don't expand anything. And let's see here. So I'll inhale. Not that much air at all. Actually, I feel like I could do a better job of that. I'll try it one more time, but still, I'm not gonna inhale low, but yeah, that was a little bit better. And that I felt like was a full chest breath, but obviously not that much air. So now I'll show you what it's like, of course, if I actually do that full expansion. So relax. Always take a full exhalation first, breathing low to high, lengthening breath. Much better. Almost a full one. Little light this morning. So it makes all the difference in the world. Remember that you should need to keep an open throat and to keep your tongue low, but it shouldn't be a loud breath, right? So if you're making like the Darth Vader sound when you breathe, like actually kind of getting that constricted back of the throat, that might be your effort to keep it open. I've had students do that before where they'll go, and it's just, that's actually constricting. That's keeping too much tension by trying to keep it open. So no need to do that either. We've already practiced a way to compare and contrast that open breath, the Ujjayi breath, which we did in our yoga, which slowed down our breathing and constricted our throat, whereas for playing, we want to breathe quickly and freely and also as quietly as possible. When we exhale naturally, we simply allow our muscles to return to their resting position. So the elasticity of our lungs, the weight of our chest and our organs is going to naturally press the air out. Now that does change a bit when we add the resistance of an instrument. But this natural release of the air is what we're looking for. So we're going to do a few little breathing bag exercises to feel the free-flowing air and with a natural expansion breath. Again, always exhale first, and don't cap or hold your breath on the inhale at all. I'm just going to do 4 in and 4 out. Very easy. Nice exhalation first, and then 4 beats in, 4 beats out. So just a few rounds of that already feels good, and it gets your air flowing and feels like you can feel the natural function of our lungs and the expansion. Of course, you can shorten the inhale, extend the exhale, maybe two counts in, 6 out, 2 in, 8 out. And you have to really work to use your slow air because there's no resistance in the balloon, right? I really like working on the faster breaths, and I find it's definitely something I need to practice to maintain. So I typically do this on a daily basis. So I'll do 1 count inhales and 4 out, or maybe 1 count inhale and 6 or 8 out. Again, always thinking of a full exhalation and then a low expansive breath. Full exhale. Always gets me feeling good and ready to go. Now again, the exhalation changes a bit when we add the resistance of an instrument. So when we add the French horn, we have to figure out how the resistance changes and how that changes the release of air and our breath support, most importantly. So let's talk about breath support. Now that can be a pretty contentious subject in the brass world. So I'm going to offer a definition of breath support, and then we'll work to understand how to use it. I would say that breath support equals the sustained flow of your airspeed meeting the resistance offered by the instrument for a specific range and dynamic. So again, it's the sustained flow of your airspeed meeting the resistance offered by the instrument for a specific range and dynamic. What do I mean by that? Well, first we need to break down the release of the air versus the sustainment of it. We've inhaled with a natural low to high expansion breath, and then we've already discussed that when we exhale, we simply let the air go. We allow our body to naturally push the air out. So I want you to think of it like a sigh, but not an exasperated or impatient sigh, where you might just basically be using your chest to breathe and then letting the shoulders drop, again, like this. Right? That's just in the chest. Instead, you need to do a sigh from that full expansion breath, sucking up the rug from low to high, and just let everything go. That's your full sigh. Another way to think about it is imagine your lungs are like a balloon, filling to capacity, so it's pressurized. Now, since that balloon is pressurized, the air immediately shoots out of it at full speed without regulation. Try to think of the expansion of your lungs like the natural pressurization of the balloon when it's inflated. The balloon wants to collapse and press the air out, and your lungs do too. However, there's an immediate problem with this theory when we add our instrument and the need to play longer phrases. That problem is resistance. So we're going to use a balloon again, but this time, as you blow it up, I want you to immediately notice the resistance of the balloon itself and feel the work that you need to do with the air to continue blowing up the balloon with a steady, consistent speed. And that's what I mean by meeting the resistance offered. Feeling that steady blow as you fill. So we need to release the air naturally with that full sigh. But then the airstream needs to immediately meet the resistance offered by the instrument, or in this case, the balloon, for whatever note you're playing and the dynamic you're playing it at. And then, of course, that has to be sustained at that level for the length of the note or the phrase. In other words, think of a balloon release of your air and then immediately sustaining a balloon filling airstream. So I'll try that one. Rug breath. Right? So notice I haven't used the word support yet, or even discussed how we support. Try to think of only meeting the resistance with your airspeed. That's what creates support, and that's really all you need to know or do. But if you're someone who really likes understanding how the concept works, let's just dig a little deeper. So when you sustain your airspeed against any resistance, support is naturally created in your body. You might think of this support as compressing your air. That compression is the manufactured continuing support needed to sustain the air after the release. So how do we physically compress our air? Well, this might feel a little silly, but try sealing around and blowing on the end of your pinky. Feel the natural engagement of your abdominal muscles when you blow against that resistance. Those are the muscles that are used to compress your air. But again, it's the resistance of the instrument that should cause those muscles to engage, not just a flexing or tensing of those muscles separately or in advance. So to get that feeling of releasing your compressed air, blow on that pinky again, and then release it. The speed with which that air comes out is how you're compressing your air against the resistance of the instrument. and that helps you sustain your airspeed. So one more easy analogy for how you might think of that released air is, of course, an air compressor filling a tire. The needle in the air nozzle pulls back and releases the air at the full speed, just like our tongue releasing the naturally pressurized air from a full expansion breath. So that air doesn't need to come up to speed after the release. It's released at the speed necessary to meet the resistance. Right? So notice the compression that is created if you stop the air with the tongue in this exercise. So if you let it sit at all, if you stop it and let it sit at all, you actually build tension, which is why I do like to think of support as a very quick two-step process. So again, is fine, but if you stop and build tension, it's not as healthy, and we eventually develop more strain in our playing. So as a two-step process, it's doing a full rug breath, exhalation or expansion breath, and then do that balloon release at full speed, and then immediately sustaining the airspeed with natural compression to meet the resistance. Now, I think I've said that plenty of times that we're meeting the resistance. So can you set that compression and support before you release the air? Well, sure, but as you felt with that air compressor exercise, if you're not careful and you hold too long, it can lead to extra tension and even hesitation in attacks, which I think a lot of brass players have experienced. So ideally, it all happens simultaneously in a flow.